Good morning, buenos dias, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Patricia Mota. I'm currently serving as President and CEO for the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, national nonprofit organization that is dedicated to provide insight, access, and professional development to both aspiring and current Latino professionals across the country. Bienvenidos. I hope you have your cafecito ready to go. It is my pleasure to welcome Marcos Garcia. Bienvenido. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Actually, it's my birthday, so it's a big day.
Feliz cumpleaños. Please tuning in, join me and wishing Marcos a happy birthday. And we'll sing you some praises and I hope you enjoy your day. And thank you for taking time to join us on your special day. Marcos is the Associate Director for the Healthcare Equality Project at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. And I'm so excited for him to join us today as we are wrapping up Pride Month to get to learn a little bit more about who he is, his story and his background. And really quickly, before we get into the conversation, I do want to do a quick announcement. If you have not applied for the leadership program, whether it be the Mujeres de HACE, the Emerging Leaders, the deadline is tomorrow, July 1st. So make sure you go to the website, reach out if you have any questions, and apply by tomorrow. Get that application in. So Marcos, bienvenido. You know, since this is Cafecito con HACE, we usually start off and ask our guests, how do you like your cafecito or your morning beverage of choice?
Absolutely. So I have my cafecito aquí. I have it right here in my Selena mug that my best friend got me. Okay.
Love it.
So cheers. Yeah, cheers. I have to say that this question is a loaded question. Normally, I have my coffee black. I like my coffee black with like a packet of Splenda in it. But because, you know, aging is a thing and the heartburn happens, I have to add a little bit of almond milk.
Yeah. I love it. I love that you just shared your cafecito, your cafecito, that is your cafecito mug with Selena. I was just hanging out and catching up with some good friends last week who recommended a Selena podcast that talks about really juxtapose her life with the Latinidad community. So it's out there. It's a great story. I just started listening to it over the weekend. You just reminded me of that. Nonetheless, we're here to get to learn more about you. Can you please share, if we have folks that are getting started in their career, tuning in, those that are further along, I think it's always great that we share our own cultural and professional backgrounds because each of us has a unique story, but also there's a lot of connections and ways that we can really identify with our own story. So can you please share with us who you are?
Absolutely. So I am a New Jersey, born and raised, incredibly proud Puerto Rican. As you can see, I have my Puerto Rican pride flag in the background. And if I had a car, that flag would be on its hood. I lived, my mom is from Puerto Rico, obviously. My dad is from Guatemala. And they met in New Jersey, fell in love, had three amazing grown men now. And I'm the third, and they're my two annoying brothers. But they instilled in us from youth that going to school is important and going to college. So I went to college and decided that I wanted to be a doctor. And at the same time, when I was a young person, in grammar school, I thought I wanted to be the president of the United States. And I kept on telling everyone I wanted to be the first Hispanic president of the United States. And so as I grew up, I kind of felt that I wanted to be perhaps aligned in science and studied science with the intent of going into medical school and decided to take a break and moved from New York, where I went to school, down here to the DC area to work at the National Cancer Institute. So I spent a few years working in skin cancer research and metastatic melanoma and working with patient blood samples and getting to know doctors and hearing from folks that were getting their PhDs, a little bit more about the field. And I was realizing that something wasn't matching in my own desires and that field. And at the same time, I had the privilege of being in DC and being at the heart of political advocacy. And so in 2012, I started volunteering with the Human Rights Campaign, which is the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. And at the time, Maryland was taking the marriage initiative to the ballot. And so it was my first opportunity to advocate for something that folks were voting on in marriage equality. At the time, there were only 6 states in DC that had marriage equality. So I enjoyed that experience. And I had a conversation with myself at the time where I needed to decide whether I was going to take a big risk and leave the science field and medicine and move into nonprofit advocacy. And at the time, the Human Rights Campaign had created this health and aging program where the Healthcare Equality Index, which is our national survey for hospitals on LGBTQ inclusion, lived. And so I decided, let's take a little bit of time, let's take a risk, let's take a leap, kind of like in Wicked, close my eyes and leap, like defying gravity, and let's take a chance. Life is kind of a little bit long, and what if I took 5 years just to see what this passion is? Let's see if I could, if political advocacy was kind of in my realm. And so I've been at the Human Rights Campaign for the past 8 years now, working with hospitals on their LGBTQ inclusion. So while I'm not directly treating patients in any way, I'm helping hospital administrators update their policies to be LGBTQ inclusive, work on their patient visitation, employment non-discrimination policies, make sure that their data collection is LGBTQ inclusive, and making sure that they're welcoming LGBTQ patients overall.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. You are the epitome, a perfect example of how we are able, as individuals, to connect our own passions with who we are as individuals. And that leads me to my next question. This year, every year, HACE comes up with the theme. It's we lead at the intersection of identity, equity, unity. So identity is about embracing the intersectional identities that we bring to the table to lead authentically. The equity piece around not only processes and structures for organizations to ensure that they have an equitable processes, structures, but also for us as individuals, how are we advocating for ourselves? And the unity piece of working across community groups as allies, and really supporting one another. For you, what does this mean? I can already get a sense from what you've already shared, but what does this mean to you?
I as I've worked at HRC over the past 8 years and thinking about what we've just been through over the past 4 in advocating for the LGBTQ community, I'm constantly reminded about Audre Lorde's quote that I'll paraphrase, which is, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. I identify as a gay man, but also I identify as Latino. I identify as New Jerseyan that pumps his fist, not his own gas. I identify as Puerto Rican. I identify, as a child of a single mother. And all of those identities make up my experience and also lead me to advocate for each of these communities, and make sure that we're, highlighting in my work, highlighting and helping communities that are typically underserved. Not only do we have gay youth in El Paso, Texas, right? We have dreamers that are gay youth in El Paso, Texas, and in Alabama. Not only do we have folks fighting for women's rights, there are LGBTQ folks that are fighting for women's rights, or we have trans women of color, specifically Latino or Latina trans women that are, under an epidemic of violence against transgender women. So, as I approach my work and think about how to be more LGBTQ inclusive, we have to highlight and support those communities and those cross sections of our own identity. So I think this theme is a wonderful theme. I think we in the progressive movement, not only LGBTQ rights, women's rights, immigrant rights, all of these organizations need to think across their own identity in order to forge a better future for all of us.
Yeah, and I love hearing your story because I know for all of us tuning in, I know you are taking away some key lessons, some inspiration for sure, in terms of how are we really leveraging our own identities to push forward and to align with our own careers and our own passion projects. Marcos, I know last year you got to join us for a webinar where we talked about what does it mean to be, LGBTQ and Latino. And then there was an article that you specifically, I think, published on HRC regarding what Latinx Heritage Month means to you. And there was a quote that you have that you said, these celebrations, such as Hispanic Heritage Month, I would even say, such as Pride Month, is where I fell in love being a Puerto Rican, Guatemalan kid from New Jersey. And I want to share that with our audience here today. The link for that article, because it speaks to, leading with your intersectional identities. And it's important that we each embrace that and bring that to the spaces that we're in. And as we are, and those of you tuning in, please get your questions, your comments, and let's wish Marcos, again, it's his birthday. So we want to make sure we're wishing him a happy birthday as we have this conversation. As we are wrapping up Pride Month, and it's crazy to believe, right, that we're already entering July, like where is time flying? Can you share, what are some of the things that you were proud of this past month as you saw celebrations, as you saw initiatives, and specifically with HRC? And what do you think is next to come on the horizon?
When I think about the Human Rights Campaign and Pride, we have to remember that Pride started as a revolution and a riot led by two amazing trans women, Marsha P. Johnson and the Puerto Rican Venezuelan Sylvia Rivera. And so, when I think about Pride, yes, we can be proud of who we are, individually as LGBTQ folks, proud of who we are and the struggle that we've had to go through, our own struggle of coming out and being LGBTQ in a world that is not always accepting, but also at the Human Rights Campaign, where we have Pride 365 days to fight for the rights that we still have yet to receive. In half of the country, we can still be fired for being LGBTQ. As I mentioned, there is an epidemic of violence against transgender women. So Pride at the Human Rights Campaign, and specifically at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, is about continuing to push our institutions to be more LGBTQ inclusive where people live, where people work, and in the community. I'm so excited to see folks coming back together this year after the pandemic. Folks are getting together for Pride. And also, I think, in DC, we had our own Pride, and it wasn't, we had a Pride that was more, it felt more real, more small town, more familial, I would say, because we had this year apart, and because we've had a few years of non-inclusivity in this country. And so, to come together, to give each other a hug, and to recognize that, there's still fights ahead at the state and local level. We're still battling some anti-trans bills. And so, we at the Human Rights Campaign are fighting, 365 days, being proud, continuing that riot, continuing that revolution to make sure that LGBTQ inclusion happens.
Thank you, Marcos. And please have your questions, share your questions if you have any questions for Marcos, or even any comments. I think, one of the things that I'd like to hear from you, Marcos, and for us to share with those tuning in is what can our listeners do, our HACE familia, because to help support, right, or to take action. Sometimes we think that we have to have a specific title or specific level of accomplishment before we can really significantly contribute to the progress. But really, sometimes it's simple things. What 2 or 3 things would you say, hey, this is what you can do right now, this is what you can consider doing to help ensure that those of us that are part of the community, but also as allies of the LGBTQ community, that we can support? Absolutely.
I think one of the simplest things is you can become a member of the organization. Support LGBTQ, not only the Human Rights Campaign, but there are many LGBTQ organizations that you can support financially. But I think on an individual level, when I think about in your own workplace and thinking through, if you work somewhere and you see HR documents that only capture male and female gender markers for its staff, perhaps asking the human resources, hey, have you thought about increasing and broadening your LGBTQ inclusion as it relates to human resources documentation? Or at your workplace, do you have employment policies that are LGBTQ inclusive? If you work in advertising, or if your company advertises, are those marketing tools marketed to the LGBTQ community? Do they share an LGBTQ couple in it? These small efforts that you can have in the workplace, and then you yourself individually, ourselves individually can, whenever we're on a panel or if we're in a meeting, if you wanted to share your own pronouns, hi, my name is Marcos, I use he, him pronouns, just to indicate that, that pronouns are important to the LGBTQ community, but also that could help someone, share with the group, hey, my pronouns are he, him, she, her, they, their, and create a more welcoming and inclusive space in meetings so that folks can come authentically to work, or, to work, to their community, to their place of worship, etc.
Yeah, no, excellent tips. And how do folks join HRC, Marcos?
So, you can visit the HRC website, hrc.org. And, we have it just takes $5 to join the organization, or, we have typically folks end up purchasing our t-shirts, and we have a store that you can buy, and that would also come with a membership to the organization.
Yeah, and supporting it should be a year-round thing. Shouldn't just happen during Pride Month. This is, inclusivity and being inclusive of all groups is an everyday thing for all of us. And so, Marcos, as we're getting ready to wrap up, what are you most hopeful for the rest of this year?
Absolutely, I think that, absolutely, what I think I'm most hopeful for is, as I mentioned, I am from New Jersey, very proud of that. And during the pandemic, unfortunately, New Jersey was hit very hard. And my mom actually lives just outside of Jersey City, which was the epicenter for the state of New Jersey. And so our family kind of took it very seriously, and we stayed apart for one holiday, which was really hard. We had Zooms and we got together, but I'm really excited just to get back together with the family this year. And to see a lot of folks get back together for the holidays this year.
I think a lot of us can agree with that, right? Especially after this past year. Marcos, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. For those of you tuning in, please reach out to Marcos on LinkedIn, be a part of HRC support, and we thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Hasta la próxima. Take care.
Adios.
Adios.